Was Nigel Farage wrong to say that the West provoked Putin into attacking Ukraine? We're taking your calls on this right now, so get in touch. 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need. Nigel Farage has doubled down on his claims that Putin was provoked into attacking Ukraine due to the West expanding the EU and NATO expanding as well. Well, let's have a listen to exactly what Nigel Farage said on this while speaking to the BBC.
I stood up in the European Parliament in 2014 and I said, and I quote, "There will be a war in Ukraine." Why did I say that? It was obvious to me that the ever eastward expansion of NATO and the European Union was giving this man a reason to his Russian people to say they're coming for us again and to go to war.
But you were echoing him.
Sorry?
You were echoing him. That's what Putin says.
No. Sorry, I've been saying this actually since the 1990s. Ever since the fall of the wall. But hang on a second. We've provoked this war. It's, of course it's his fault. He's used what we've done
we
as an
provoked
excuse.
the invasion of Ukraine.
And now he's not only saying that the West provoked the situation, but that we should try to negotiate with Putin over it.
Yes, I do support us giving munitions and help to Ukraine, but I feel the war is a complete stalemate. I think the number of lives being lost is horrific. There have been no sensible, substantive negotiations of any kind. And even if negotiations to try and find a peace, to try and find a way through failed, I think it's better to have those negotiations than not.
The Prime Minister has criticised Farage for playing into Putin's hands.
Now, what he said was completely wrong and only plays into Putin's hands. This is a man who deployed nerve agents on the streets of Britain, who's doing deals with countries like North Korea, and this kind of appeasement is dangerous for Britain's security, the security of our allies that rely on us, and only emboldens Putin further.
Albie, I feel duty-bound to say that Nigel Farage, in September 2014, he spoke at the European Parliament, warning of the provocation for Putin. That is after Vladimir Putin had already annexed Crimea. That happened in February, March. So this idea that he was the one who sort of foresaw this, I'm afraid that there's no evidence of that other than Mr. Farage's word for it.
Yes, I don't think it needed to take Nostradamus for someone to say in 10 years' time there's going to be a war in Ukraine after actually a part of Ukraine had already been invaded by Russia in 2014 when Nigel made that statement. First of all, I want to say congratulations to Nigel on the birth of his grandson. He announced that this morning, but that's where the niceties end. This comment is just so ridiculous. And do you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of people who make that argument about women who get raped, who say, well, if you didn't wear such a short skirt, you wouldn't get raped. It is about as useful as that sort of comment. It is a ridiculous comment to say that democratic nations who made democratic decisions to join the European Union, to join the defensive alliance NATO, keyword defensive alliance NATO, not aggressive alliance NATO, to stop being invaded by a country like Russia, which is totally against the types of things that me and Nigel stand for: freedom, democracy, the rule of law, liberal, democratic, British Western values that we all love and cherish, that other countries want to be part of. I think the idea that democracy growing in Europe has threatened Russia and therefore justifies their invasion of a democratically elected country is absolutely abysmal. And, I'm so angry about this. I'm really frustrated that Nigel, he does say some points that I agree with, but then he'll say things like this, which are just totally nonsensical.
OK. Nina, we know that you're not the biggest Nigel Farage fan, but let's focus just on this idea. Can there be any truth that what we've seen happen in Ukraine was a result of actions taken by our government and by European governments?
I don't think you can. I think, you can say that, obviously, NATO expanded, and it has expanded eastwards.
But I think that word expansion and expanding
Yeah.
is very, very important.
It is.
Because it suggests this idea that it's NATO and the EU that are doing the expanding.
No,
and as
expanding
Albie pointed out, it's countries have to apply to become members of NATO, apply to become members of the EU with their democratically elected governments.
Yes, absolutely. So perhaps expanding is the wrong word to use. But when people have voted to be part of a democracy, to part of a group of nations who are democratically elected, that is an entirely different thing from expanding into. So I'm sorry, expanding is the wrong word
those
to
are the
use.
words that Nigel Farage
Yes,
is
exactly.
using. But I
On
think
purpose, by the way.
Obviously. Now, the thing about Farage is that he wants to get himself in the headlines. He wants to get himself voted. He wants, and everybody's talking about him. So he says these things, knowing that the thing is, he has no accountability to anybody.
OK, all right. Well, look, let's bring in now someone who has spent a lot of time with Nigel Farage and might be able to explain what his reasoning is. Here to speak to us is a former Brexit Party MEP and friend of the show, of course, Belinda de Lucy. Belinda, thanks for joining us. Nice to see you.
Pleasure. Lovely to be on. I am quite shocked at the sort of hysterical reaction to some very intellectually defensible comments that Nigel has made, and it has really, I find it quite disturbing, this move to try and shut down any debate and any concern that people have had over the expansion of NATO and EU nearer and nearer to Russia's borders that may have increased the risk of conflict with Russia, because history.
Okay, so Belinda, let's ask you the question I think both Albie and Nina have been making. If a country, after the fall of the USSR, so those countries that are around Russia, if they have their own sovereign governments, I know sovereignty means a lot to you and to Nigel. So if they have their own sovereign governments and those sovereign governments want to become members of NATO and the EU, you're saying, well, that's a sign of aggression and they shouldn't do it. Is that what you're saying?
Not at all. I mean, that so much is being twisted here. It really is. And I get that Reform UK are going up in the polls and the establishment feel very threatened by it. But the twisting of the narrative is getting ridiculous. Every sovereign country has the right to sign up to the EU and NATO if they wish. This is not what it's about. Explaining the geopolitical climate around a war is not the same as justifying it. And what is important to comment, I would say, is the EU dismissed concerns and the risks that it was going to take by offering in 2014 Ukraine associate membership, not thinking, how might this affect our relationship with Russia? Should we not sit down first and talk about it? They dismissed it. And secondly, there are many contributing factors to how a war comes about. None of them have to justify it, but to shut down any debate around the circumstances of a war, I find more frightening than what Nigel said.
Belinda, stay with us. Let's hear what people are saying at home, because lots of people have got an opinion on this. Let's start with Kevin in London. Kevin, good morning. What do you make of Farage's comments?
I think they're disgraceful. They're betraying the country that he's in. The words from Nigel Farage are pure self-publicity. He wants to be on the front page, and he'll do anything he can to do it, including betraying Ukraine. If anyone who says anything so pro-Russia should remember that Russia has stolen 20,000 children. They've stolen 20,000 children. That is not justifiable.
OK, but Kevin, because we've got to stick to the facts. Nigel Farage is not supporting the war in Ukraine. In fact, he's talking today about how we need to bring that war to an end. He has blamed Vladimir Putin for the war. I think the point he's trying to make, and the point that Belinda is backing up here, is that perhaps the actions taken by the EU and NATO by allowing those sovereign countries to become members of the groups, that has been a provocation against Vladimir Putin. Do you agree with him on that?
If democratic countries want to join up with us, that's fine. to actually threaten them because to join us, you might get invaded. We can't stand for this, and Nigel Farage is betraying the front line. That we should stand together as one solid group. We should stand solid against him.
Okay.
And no cracks should be shown.
Okay,
Yeah,
Kevin, I'm going to leave it there because lots of people want to have their say. You've made your point very clearly. Look, after the break, your calls on Nigel Farage's comments. Was he wrong to say that the West provoked Russia into invading Ukraine? 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need. Let's speak to Bill, who's got in touch with us from Manchester. Bill, good morning. Do you agree?
About the only thing I'd ever agree with Mr. Farage on, yes.
Why do you agree? What?
Right, OK. 1954, the Soviet Union, as it then was, the 15 republics, including Ukraine, applied to join NATO. Mm-hmm. Don't forget that they suffered the lion's share of casualties. I know lots were killed by Stalin and all the rest, but nevertheless, Churchill's own words, they tore the guts out of the Nazi war machine. They've never had proper recognition for this. And ever since then, it seems to be a matter of a surrounding, if you can surround someone as massive as the Soviet Union, but certainly pushing and pushing and pushing and seeing how far they can get. I personally think they never wanted Russia in NATO, though the Soviet Union was then, because they need an enemy for the American military-industrial complex. They make money, and that's fundamentally what the so-called democracy of America is about, money-making and sabotaging governments they don't like. They've done it all over the Americas, Africa.
OK, but Bill, let me take you back a step. The simple question that we've all been trying to get our heads around is, if a sovereign country says, we'd like to be members of NATO, please, then how is that a provocation to Vladimir Putin?
No, it isn't. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's been a...
So if you're not saying that, then what did the West do to provoke Russia?
The West is not one unified entity.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
NATO, all amalgamated under the American war machine of NATO.
Okay.
I think an enemy, and I think they knew Putin's state of mind. I mean, he's a megalomaniac, for God's sake. I think he sees himself as...
Well, according to Nigel Farage, he's one of the leaders that he admires most. He was asked that in an interview in 2014 after Vladimir Putin had annexed the Crimea, and he said that he admired him.
Yeah, he's an anti-socialist, the same as Zelensky's. And by the way, Zelensky's banned the communist and socialist parties. That's even America's got communist parties, for God's sake.
All right, Bill, thank you. I'm only going to move on because there's lots of people who want to have their say. Let's take another one from Paul in London. Paul, good morning. Do you agree with Farage?
No, Mr. Farage is wrong, and so is Belinda. The reason being that many people make judgments when they do not know the history of the world. Long before Nazi Germany occupied most of Europe, in the 20s and 30s, the Nazi Soviet Union occupied parts of Europe. Then when Nazi Germany was defeated, once again, the Nazi Soviet Union occupied parts of Europe. No country has a right to dictate to other countries whether they join NATO or not.
OK, pause there, Paul. Pause there, Paul. Pause for a second. Belinda, what do you make of what Paul's just said? No country has the right to dictate to another sovereign country whether they're going to join NATO or not.
But that's not what Nigel said. Like, we've got to get back to the point. Of course, countries are free to sign up to NATO if they choose, and to the EU. The point he was making is that Putin will interpret this as a provocation. Nigel wasn't justifying it. He was saying this is how Putin will interpret it. Putin said in 2008, after the Bucharest NATO summit opened its arms to Georgia and Moldova and said, come and join NATO, let's get you on the path to NATO. Putin said he's going to take this as a threat.
Belinda.
The former ambassador to Russia, the British ambassador from 2000 to 2004, Sir Roderick Lynn, said that this crossed a red line for Putin. It's all about
Albie,
how Putin
Belinda,
perceives it.
I hear what you're
No
saying.
one's justifying the war. No one is justifying the war. Putin is a mass murderer, But I think it is
Belinda,
childish
pause a
not
second.
to take...
Albie.
Belinda, look, you and I agree on a lot of things. We do not agree on this. Look, I suppose the question about NATO accepting more members is quite a fundamental one. You say that Putin would take that as a provocation. He might take it as a provocation. The question is it a provocation? And is he right to take it as a provocation? The answer is no. Do you agree?
Absolutely, in our opinion, from the West point of view. But you're talking as if
therefore Nigel's
Putin
comment
lives
is
in the West.
nonsense.
No, it's not true. What Nigel was saying, and Nigel, by the way, said that the invasion was utterly indefensible, outrageous, was Putin's complete fault. And Alexis, when you said he admired Putin, his full sentence was he admired him as a political operator.
So Belinda,
not as a human being.
Okay, but that's really important, and I'm glad you brought that up. He admires him as a political operator. He made that comment after Vladimir Putin had annexed Crimea in 2014. So what does he admire of the political operator? Is it the political assassinations? Is it the suppression of the press?
Not at all.
What is there to admire?
I think when you have evil leaders around the world, many of them are good communicators and good political operators. They have to be able to persuade people to get on their evil train. Hitler did the same.
I've got to go back
evil people can be good communicators, and it's ridiculous to say
that's not exactly the explanation that Nigel Farage gave. Mark in Lancashire, welcome to the show. Good morning. What are your thoughts, Mark?
My thoughts are that people are angry because Nigel said what he said, not the fact that he was right or wrong. He was absolutely right. He told people years ago, 2014 I think it was, that we were crossing a line. And it was well known. Historically, Russia is terrified of invasion. Yeah. And there's several choke points around the world that are, and one of them is Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, etc., Bulgaria, Romania, and Ukraine is on the way to those choke points. And Russia is terrified of people invading it. In the same way that if we went and put Russian troops in Mexico or in Canada, I think America would get a little bit twitchy about it. So we did cross the line. We did antagonize him. Now, that doesn't mean that Putin was right to invade any sovereign country. And Nigel Farage has not said that he was right. In fact, he said he's a horrible person.
He has condemned him and the war. You're right.
Yes. But all he was saying was that, I did warn you that we were going too close, and we promised we wouldn't move further. When the Soviet Union started to break down, we promised we wouldn't go any further east. And yet we brought in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Bulgaria.
We didn't bring them in. They asked to join. But I see your point. Mark, thank you. And thank you, Belinda. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us.